is the right time to stand up for freedom? Could it be when you start to feel creating children who'll inherit the pain and the debt of this nation and be slaves to the banks that cause hyperinflation, who are masters of commerce, lies, and bad legislation? Whoa, if you looked in the eyes of 1,000 young children through fences of razors, their innocence stolen as the red flag of tyranny flies in the open, is that when you finally notice? Whoa, but I'm only a stranger here. I'm a long, long way from my home, and they say I can't change all the things I find strange, for what can one man do alone?
Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Liberty Test, the podcast where we take a government policy, usually from New York State, run it through the principles of the New York Libertarian Party platform, and see if it survives. Spoiler, it usually doesn't. I'm your host, Dan Castello, and tonight we're talking climate policy and government power squared. I'll explain that in a minute. First, New York State has committed to one of the most aggressive climate agendas in the country. Net zero emissions, 100% clean power grid, and enough regulations to make your smart thermostat sweat. That's already enough for a full episode. But now the federal government is stepping in, challenging some of those policies and throwing its own weight around, which raises the big question: if one level of government overreaches, is it a win when another one steps in to stop it? Or are we just trading flavors of tyranny? As always, we're going to start with a good faith steel man of the state government's perspective. What are they trying to do with these climate laws, and what's the best case argument for them? Then we'll bring the libertarian critique: which rights are being violated, what principles are getting steamrolled, and what would a liberty-aligned solution look like? We'll also tackle the thornier issue of whether using federal power to block state overreach is a legitimate act of self-defense, or a dangerous game that sets liberty up for failure in the long run. Joining me tonight to help make sense of it all are two fellow libertarian activists, Robert Schuon and Rose Leatherman. Let's get into it. I'll start by laying out the state's position, and then, Bob, I'd love to get your thoughts on, the libertarian critique. So here's the steel man of the New York position here. New York State's government wants to be a national leader on climate policy. And with their love for acronyms, they have the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act, or the CLCPA. They've made some of the most ambitious, is that the right word if I'm trying to be pro-government? Some of the most ambitious climate commitments in the country. The law, which was passed back in 2019, requires a 40% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions by 2030 and an 85% reduction by 2050, all based on 1990 levels. The final target: net zero emissions across the entire state by mid-century. And that's not just a wish list. These are legally binding goals. So to hit them, the state is pushing for 70% renewable electricity by 2030 and a completely zero emissions electric grid by 2040. Offshore wind plays a big part in that plan, with a target of 9,000 megawatts of wind energy by 2035. But this isn't just about carbon. Of course, keep in mind these are Democrats. So the CLCPA emphasizes so-called climate justice, which requires that at least 35% of the benefits from clean energy programs go to disadvantaged communities. How nice. That's meant to correct environmental inequities and make sure the transition isn't just clean, but also fair.
Does disadvantaged communities basically mean blue communities that owe their allegiance to the blue party? Is that what we're talking about?
Well, it means that the Climate Action Council, which is a 22-member team, gets to turn these big goals into actual policies, and that gives them power across sectors like transportation, housing, agriculture, and manufacturing. But again, from the state's perspective, if we assume they're being earnest, and this isn't just an excuse for a power grab, climate change is an urgent threat that demands bold, centralized action. And New York is stepping up to meet that challenge. The CLCPA is a roadmap they're using, and they're just framing it not just as an environmental necessity, but it's a moral obligation and an economic opportunity.
These communities are usually ones that they've screwed over in the past with things like their zoning laws and their drug war as well. But we can get into that later, how they're just trying to fix problems they created.
Yeah, well, they've already been pushing the agenda, like the whole bit about New York. You can't buy a gas stove, a gas mower, other gasoline accessories, no matter how much the alternatives might cost or how much less efficient and effective they are. You know, like as a resident. Yes, and there's one advantage is that the electric ones tend to be slightly quieter than the gas ones. So when the landscaper comes along to mow your lawn, it's a little bit quieter, but
I have an electric lawnmower and I love it, and an electric chainsaw and I love it. On the other hand, I have a gas-powered snowblower and I prefer that.
yes. Again, this is like, why does the state get to decide all of this on a central basis without input from the people that live in the state? You know, again, I wonder, like how badly are you breaking the law if you went to, let's say, Pennsylvania or one of the other states and bought like a gas lawnmower or a gasoline snowblower to do this? I mean, we went through this nonsense also with natural gas. Okay, they're trying to eliminate natural gas literally for the children. It's for the children. And like, give me a break, okay?
Rose, you have a children. Should we eliminate natural gas?
From what I understand, like to answer the question about what laws we'd be breaking. Okay, so as of it's just a prohibition on new buildings containing gas hookups. So they have not yet outlawed the possession of gas stoves. Like, you're not going to get arrested for having a gas stove in your house. What will happen though is that they will not be manufactured anymore, either because manufacture itself will be outlawed, or just because if new buildings can't contain them, there'd be no incentive for companies to produce them, so they'll stop making them. So what will happen is people who already have these appliances in their homes will not be able to repair them if they break or replace them. So they'll kind of be forced to transition.
They'll go to other states. You know what I mean? Like this is what really happens. See,
in theory,
you can't get a gas stove if there's no gas hookup in your new house.
Right.
Well, that's
their
idea.
If you have one in your old house, like, okay, you can go out of state and replace it unless they really decide to crack down and start outlawing possession, which, I mean, could happen at some point. Oftentimes laws like this are kind of a foot in the door, and then once people are used to these things no longer existing, then they can start really cracking down and saying, okay, some people are not following the law, so clearly we have to take a more heavy-handed approach because these people are being inconsiderate and they're not helping us save the environment.
It also normalizes a particular...
and everything. There'll be a tip line so you can report your neighbor if you see them using a gas-powered appliance.
It sounds ridiculous, but they're creating a social norm where only weird reactionary Republicans or libertarians want to have gas appliances. So of course you want to report them because they're weird. They're antisocial.
Well, right, and again, it's for the children, though. Okay, we need to stop climate change for the children, according to the government that carries out its nuclear weapons tests over the oceans. They claim to want to preserve and live in giant beachfront properties that require as much energy as a small town.
Wait.
But we know that they are coming from a place of wanting to conserve the environment for them. But
you know,
I was just gonna say, aren't they violating our property rights and our freedom of voluntary exchange? But no, you're right. They're protecting our rights from the evil people who want to cause pollution because they're selfish, right?
You know, the problem is that libertarians take a completely opposite view of that, because here's my property, right? why would I want to trash my own property? Why would I want to have smog over my house? Why would I want to have an environment that is not safe for children to grow up in? But the difference is in who decides, because I think I can decide better than a faceless state official that is basically could be taking money from these industries. Again, the whole climate change. It's funny how carbon credits are going to be sold like indulgences. The Catholic Church in the Middle Ages sold indulgences, and Martin Luther wrote a letter about it. And he was the first one canceled because he wrote the letter and posted it up on the doors. And then the Catholic Church tried to cancel him because they liked getting that money. And
I don't know, Jesus got canceled pretty hard too.
Yeah,
Didn't he?
that too. But that technically wasn't Catholic, so they didn't exist then. So. But the point being is that this is what it turns into: is carbon credits are simply a way to transfer your pollution for money.
It's
so you can pollute
even
all you
more
want,
than that. Government loves to take your rights and then sell them back to you.
Just like how we can't just start a business. We have to go to the state, apply for a permission slip, wait months and months, and then pay them a fee just so that we can sell something that we own to someone who wants to engage in a voluntary transaction with us. Yeah, like this is just the latest version of that. Okay.
And
you have run out of your allotted carbon credits, but if you're a good citizen, you can earn more of them.
The thing is, like, does anybody remember what happened in California? Like, again, if you're going to eliminate all the fossil fuels, all of that stuff, it's not magic. Now, this is science and engineering, okay? There's X number of megawatts or gigawatts put out by the Niagara Falls plant, which, by the way, keep in mind, we're fighting with Canada right now, and they've actually threatened to take their power away, which would basically devastate New York, okay? If the Canadian government decided to stop transmitting power through the Niagara Falls station, basically 2/3 of New York would go black almost immediately. Okay.
Really?
Oh yeah, because it's they supply.
Yeah, it involves load balancing.
Most of the Northeast with their power. Okay, and then on top of that, how much wind, how much solar are you going to actually do? They're doing it off Long Island. Okay, they're doing it out in the ocean. The screams are happening every day. They're doing it anyway, but there's also a lot of studies that say wind turbines are not the permanent fix for this. They last 10 years, need to be replaced. It's not. This is they talk about the science. Yeah, the science is it's a mechanical device. They don't handle high winds very well. As a matter of fact, if the winds get high enough, you have to shut down the wind turbine. Otherwise, you'll destroy the blades. Okay, you have to feather them. Feathering is an aeronautical term where you turn the blade so it faces into the wind so that it doesn't spin so fast that it damages the blade or overload stuff inside the tower. And this is only part of it. And how are we supposed to do this in the time frame that they're specifying? And what happens if we don't? You can pass all the laws you want, but if you don't reach that climate goal, then what happens? They take your car away? Is that the plan here? Like what exactly is the idea?
What will happen is, for example, they mandate that all cars sold in a particular state, in our case, New York, must be electric by a certain date. However, the power grid may or may not be able to handle that many electric cars.
It can.
What will happen is, people will buy electric cars because they have to. There will be rolling blackouts potentially, and you'll be limited in how much you can drive. So then the state will come in, and then there will be, as their solution, they'll
they want a crisis because then they can ration. They can ration.
They have to ration power, so you'll be limited in how much you can drive.
Because now they get
That's-
9 more months of congestion pricing, which we have already discussed in the
I mean, that's
past.
already in addition to the fact that people, you can't just go out and buy an electric car. Like, your house has to be designed so that you can charge your car. A lot of people will have to they'll have to make some serious upgrades to their house so that they can charge their car. Like that.
It's the infrastructure.
It's not just buying the car. Like, you also have to. It can cost a ton of money just to be able to support an electric car. And then there's the question of how much more eco-friendly they actually are.
Right.
A lot of our power is still coming from coal. So is it really
Coal is not as harmful as people make it out to be, but I don't really want to get into that.
Right.
Yeah, to be honest, I think what I'm hearing here is that in addition to the rights violations, which we should look at our platform and actually enumerate, but in addition to the rights violations, it sounds like the New York policy is sort of ideologically based, if we're being generous. Again, if their goals are actually just a power grab, then it doesn't matter whether you have to feather props or whether the grid can handle electric car charging. It doesn't matter. They actually want more crisis so that they can seize more power. But steel manning their argument, wouldn't a free market work better at actually figuring out the solutions to these problems if these problems are legitimate?
If there were no fossil fuel subsidies in the first place, and we didn't have a massive military industrial complex that starts wars in order to get cheap oil for people, and oil was actually in shorter supply, I think companies would naturally have started looking for alternatives and developing more sustainable, eco-friendly fuel sources in the first place. And this would have happened a long time ago. For a long time, like, the fossil fuel companies that are subsidized and propped up by the state were blocking development of new technologies. So we would have had these things would have been developed a long time ago, and people would have naturally wanted to transition away from fossil fuels. But what we have now, we have gas that's being we've gotten dependent on fossil fuels when we didn't need to, but now we're kind of being forced to suddenly transition away from it. But we're not able to do that on their time frame.
But there's so much, people forget that they think fossil fuel, they think gasoline or maybe diesel fuel. That's not true. Okay? Plastics. There's so much stuff. Electronics. It's all built with fossil fuels. It's built with long chain molecules. That half the pharmaceuticals in the country, it's fossil fuels. It's all based on stuff like that. This is fertilizer. The part where I have problems with the leftist ideological point of view, because, guys, learn some maths. Okay, learn some maths, and
they're so bad at math. They can't do math.
This is literally the stuff that the old Soviet Union used to pull, which is, we have a 5-year plan. Well, but we didn't make the last 5-year plan, but we're going to make this one. And
but Bob, we got to see during COVID that now we'll get banned from YouTube, but we got to see during COVID exactly the type of world that blue state leaders want us to live in.
Yeah, the COVID passports were, there are people who really love the idea of just normalizing having to show a passport to get into businesses and, to be able to do pretty much anything in society.
You know what I just heard today, by the way, just as a side note, that there's still somebody they were basically faked those vaccine cards to keep their children from being forced vaccinated, and they're literally up for going to prison.
We should cover that on another episode.
We definitely should. But point being, back to this, is that first question is, does the state have the authority to dictate to everyone inside the state, we're going to do it this way or else? And again, what's the or else? Because what do you do? Again, you're going to take my car away? Are you going to basically deny me a driver's license? What's going to happen, of course, there's going to be a giant black market in people registering their cars in other states. And, because what are you going to do? You stop the tourists from coming and using cars?
But Bob, I want to stop you right there before we lose the very important point you just brought up there. Does the state have authority to dictate how individuals use their property, their homes, their
Right.
land, their vehicles,
I'm
right?
already
Do they
ticked
have
about the
that
gas thing.
authority?
What
Right.
was
So
agreed
according
to?
to our principles, the platform, we have a plank on this. I think it's 1.4. Individuals have the right to acquire, own, utilize, and dispose of assets. So are energy mandates and retrofit requirements and gas stove bans violating that right?
Oh,
Well,
from our point of
what's
view,
the
absolutely.
agreement? Did we agree to anything when we moved or were born in this state? Like,
Right.
for example, in a, if say you have a voluntary community where people decide to move there, they sign an agreement, which one of those rules is, okay, we're not going to use fossil fuels in this community. Okay, you specifically agreed to that when you decided to live there. However, that's not how the real world works. Like,
Well, we
under the
vote.
current
So
status system, okay, we did not sign any social contract. We did not consent to having gas-powered stoves or gasoline-powered cars outlawed. This decision was made for us by people thousands of miles away, or hundreds of miles away at least, sitting in an office somewhere.
but Rose, does voting
Okay.
basically equal legitimate consent?
Well, you
The
realize
fact that we continue to live here, knowing that people with our beliefs have been outvoted in a fair election, does this process reflect legitimate consent?
well,
We
here's
did not
the
agree
problem.
to that system.
Is
We
that
live here. We
New York-
choose to live here.
New York State, New York City was just forced by court edict to clean 1 million dead people off the rolls. 1 million. So asking about that vote thing, there's some questions about that because, literally certain.
I actually want to give them the benefit of the doubt on the voting, though, because here's the thing:
Okay, just
our argument isn't very
incompetent.
strong. If the reason why, they can't do these mandates is because only 53% of New Yorkers support it.
Oh no,
I
no,
don't
but
think
you
it's
brought up the
right,
vote
no
thing.
matter how many New
But you
Yorkers
tried to
support
say,
it.
well, we vote for our elected officials. Well,
Yeah, I'm
that's
playing
kind
devil's
of
advocate.
iffy
Yeah, okay.
there.
All right. We can
You
get
know,
conspiratorial, and I'm with you actually on that. But I
Yeah,
mean,
but
the
if
voting,
it's legitimate, yeah, the
yeah,
tyranny of the majority.
and that's the
If
other thing
we're
is,
outnumbered, do other people have the right to decide for us how we're allowed to live our lives just because there are more of them than there are of us? Like,
well, the problem is they strawman the argument because again, our thing is, as long as you don't hurt anybody else, okay, or steal their stuff. Well, they say, well, yes, these climate things and gasoline is damaging to the environment, which harms everybody, which is using a straw man argument to the nth degree. Okay, that okay. First, do you have all the proof of this? And they don't. They never do. They claim they do, but they don't. Second, there aren't any other alternatives. The strange part is people again don't realize this because the news never reports it, but the current day's cars are some of the cleanest, most efficient, least polluting objects in.
they're also Rube Goldberg machines. Have you
Well,
looked
that
at the
too.
turbo
The new
engines
ones are
and the
ridiculous. Well,
look
this
what
is
they've done
again.
to diesel? Oh my God, the diesel engines have
Yeah.
been
Well, now
ruined.
now you have what's the delete fluid or whatever it is, whatever they call that stuff.
Don't get me started. I don't want to make this
well,
car
that's a whole
talk,
separate
but
that we can talk about another time. But the point being is that cars are already incredibly efficient. Okay, yes, in my opinion, yes, they've gone way over the top because to the point where you're shutting off a car because you're sitting for 10 or 15 seconds at a traffic light.
Mhm.
There's many
An
arguments
engine that
against
should last 800,000 miles now
right.
is lucky to last 150,000. And look at all the waste and pollution and the batteries that need to be disposed of and the manufacturing and the shipments all over the world for the supply chain, the slave labor used to mine the cobalt. I mean,
oh yeah,
we could,
that's again the question of whether these are actually more eco-friendly when you
Right.
look into like the rare earth minerals that are required to build these, and yeah, how they're obtained.
Yeah, but again, I want to stand on the strongest libertarian grounds here in opposing this, which is that even if the government is right that climate change is a crisis, and they are right that it is man-made, and they are right that New York can sacrifice
Can
a
fix
meaningful
it.
amount to fix it, and they are right that
Yeah,
these
good.
methods are the best, most efficient ways to do that while maintaining enough of a quality of life for New Yorkers, then do they still have the authority to impose that on the basis
Yeah.
that our pollution is harming other people?
And that's no. I said it's a straw man argument. It's a way straw man argument because again, look at the change. If you were to add up all those probabilities, I wonder if it would exceed like winning the lotto. Because again, all of these arguments, and they've been refuted time and again by actual science that says no. And there's always a trade off, right? You ever heard the phrase "Tannstaffel"? Most libertarians have, but very few other people have.
Go ahead, explain it.
Tannstaffel was actually used a lot by the science fiction author Robert Heinlein, and it means there's no such thing as a free lunch. It's initial slang, okay? So when somebody says Tannstaffel, it means you can't get something without paying for it. That's the way it works. There's always a trade-off in what we're doing. So if they're going to go...
soul, there are no solutions, only trade-offs.
Only trade-offs. And if we're going to do this, okay, what are the trade-offs? And already we've started discussing some of that. The battery problem. The problem that, first of all, charging an electric car takes a long time. A long time. Even at high rates, it takes a long time. The beauty of gasoline, it is the most efficient fuel in a cubic unit of volume. Okay, that's the way it is. It has the most energy for that unit of volume. So it makes it tremendously powerful for things like cars where you need to be able to fill it up, get in it, and go. Okay? If
and for emergency generators, like for hospitals and airports.
You have to suddenly flee your location because, I don't know, maybe you're in an area that's wildfire prone or something. You have, but
tornadoes coming. You want to get out of it. Like, whatever.
You can't.
Oh, you don't have enough carbon credits to start your car today.
This is the other thing is what we've already been through this with the sea time in 2020 of the government dictating, and look at the effect that it has. And did that really work out all that well? And it didn't really. It didn't work out at all.
The question was, is it actually well-intentioned, or is this a power grab? Well, I mean...
Well, it's both. I mean, why can't you have both?
At the very least, okay, what usually happens is you look into, like, the donors that, you look into who's funding the people who vote yes on bills like this. Usually they're getting money from some green energy, quote-unquote, company, or they just happen to own stock in such a company. So they have ulterior motives for wanting to vote yes on something like that. But at the same time, then you're getting kind of into the conspiratorial stuff. But is
not
there
conspiracy? It's in their business plans, and it's in
Is
their
there
Davos global agenda and the UN climate consensus.
Are there people in some of the higher levels of office who want to just have more control of the population and making it more difficult for them to travel, making them more reliant on, say, public transport, where the use of it can be revoked? Same thing with the gas stoves, or
whether or not that's deliberate intent. That's the effects. That's what happens. And it's the same thing with the airlines. You see they're making it more and more difficult, right? This is, first of all, now you have to have an ID card, a special national ID card to get on a plane. Then they want to scan your retinas. This is all control of the government over your travel, which, by the way, is prohibited by the Constitution.
Right.
Yeah, and it's not just Democrats doing this. The Republicans had their goddamn war on terror and their Patriot Act and all that garbage. So it doesn't matter what the crisis is or which party.
For opposing the military-industrial complex and shipping them off to prisons in foreign countries. So they like to pretend that they're the free speech advocates, but no. I mean,
I've
Well,
seen a few of
that's
them
why I
recently.
bring it up,
Back
because
in
it
the
doesn't
US.
matter what the crisis is. Government is always the answer.
Oh yeah, but that's the way it is. So when you're a politician, that's your job. Your job is to push government. Government. When you only have a hammer, everything you see is a nail. So it's that issue over and over and over again.
Yeah, I used to think it was just voters wanted their problems solved with the easy button, and
Well, it's
politicians
different.
wanted to appeal to voters. That, to me, was a plausible mechanism for government expansion.
I
But the
think
more
at the
we
lower
dive
levels,
into
that's
these issues, and you're right, Rose, at the lower levels, I bet that's all it is. But I think once you reach state level and
uh-huh.
higher, I think it's a lot of corruption. I think there's a
Uh-huh.
lot of people who see, like who said a camel's nose under the tent or a foot in the door?
That's one of my favorite
Yeah,
phrases.
right.
Right. Yeah. And
It-
yeah, there are people in politics who they have some serious God complexes. Like they think that
Mhm.
okay, these people are too stupid to make their own decisions. But look at all the good we could do if we were just in charge of things. We could make a much better world. These idiots just need to not be allowed to make their own decisions. Like
I do
this
know a
is a
lot of idiots who shouldn't make their own decisions.
and it's a very, very easy mentality to fall into because
We've got a section on that in our platform.
people are naturally arrogant. We do think we know better than other people. Okay, it takes a lot of humility to realize, hey, I don't even know what's best for my own life half the time. Okay, I can't possibly be making decisions for other people too. Okay, the
Well,
mentality that you know better than others and that you should be in charge is extremely common. Sometimes people like that reach the highest levels of office, and yeah, they do have a vested interest in trying to control the population. So, in this
here's
particular
no,
case, if
hold on, hold
environmental policy helps them achieve this, yeah, they'll use whatever excuses they have to. Okay, a scary virus, climate change, foreign threat, whatever.
Well, let me go back to something that Dan, I believe, said about the God complex. So, speaking of the God complex, U.S. President Donald Trump issued an executive order on Tuesday that aims to block the enforcement of state laws passed to reduce the use of fossil fuels and combat climate change. Okay, the order directed the U.S. Attorney General to identify state laws that address climate change, ESG initiatives, which is is social. I forget what the environmental justice, environment, social, and whatever the G was, and carbon emissions, and take
governance.
action to block them. Okay, so now the federal, because of course that voting thing, the majority of Americans decided, yeah, we don't want to go like the way of California. We want to go a different way, and they chose a different group. Okay, and now you have the infighting between the state and the federal government over who actually gets to control it, because obviously they're not going to let us do it. So yeah.
Well, let me see if I can steelman Trump's argument, because Trump's role in this is it's huge. I want to get your
and
take
there
on
is
this. So
a point, like constitutionally, I'm not saying libertarian wise, but constitutionally,
he
there
is not a libertarian, but I can see how his perspective on this and his recent action yesterday um, would be cheered by libertarians. But I want to go back a little bit and explain some background. So, back when he was in office the first time, President Trump took a very different approach to climate policy. So, he prioritized energy independence, because that's what he's big on, economic growth, because he wants to see go up so that he can look successful, but also individual state autonomy. From his administration's perspective, New York's aggressive climate mandates weren't ambitious, they were reckless. So when New York blocked key natural gas infrastructure like the Williams pipeline, which would have delivered gas to Long Island or New York City, the Trump administration saw that as a red flag. So energy shortages, blackouts, price spikes, those were things that were already hitting families and small businesses. So Trump's team stepped in, and their argument was that the state was putting ideology ahead of practicality and ahead of, the needs of common Americans. To the Trump administration, fossil fuels, especially natural gas, weren't the enemy. You guys remember drill, baby, drill, and all that
yes.
crap, right? So they were a bridge to something more
we may have lost
Holmes.
our audio. Oh, there you go. You're back. We lost
Can
our
you hear me?
audio for a moment. Yeah.
Oh, okay. So Trump felt, and his administration policy was that fossil fuels, especially natural gas, weren't the enemy, that they were a clean, reliable fuel that could power homes and schools and hospitals, and it was affordable. It wouldn't break the bank, right? So in their eyes, New York's refusal to expand access wasn't about protecting the planet. It was about signaling green virtue and maybe loyalty to foreign globalists, even if it hurt the people who could least afford it. So Trump actually, in 2020, he was in Pennsylvania. I got a quote here. He said, and I'm not going to do a Trump impression, can't do it, sorry. He said, "We are opening up natural gas. We are helping people. We are saving families thousands of dollars in heating costs, and we're not going to let radical politicians shut it down." So the way I see it, his message was pretty clear. He was willing to let markets innovate and let states find their own balance, within the state using market forces. So, he felt don't punish working class Americans or regional industries in the name of a one size fits all climate agenda. That sounds pretty libertarian on the face of it, right?
I hate it when I agree with him because yeah, I agree with what he
Why?
said there. At the
Yeah.
same, okay, is it for the right reasons? Probably not. He's probably just getting huge donations from fossil fuel companies. But okay, he kind of helped us kick the can down the road a few years. Okay, so we may not have to deal with even higher energy costs, which in New York, our power bills have already skyrocketed in recent years. Okay, perhaps he has slowed that down just a little bit. Perhaps he's delayed us being forced to buy electric cars and not be able to afford the upgrades to our house to be able to charge them properly. But yeah, it may or may not be for the right reasons.
Right, but the question becomes, if something is done that advances the free market and possibly liberty, is that is that eclipsed by the fact that they might not be doing it for the reasons that we want them to be doing it as libertarians?
No, any amount of decentralization when it comes to markets is better than none. If he stopped some amount of market centralization, that's still better. So I think it's important to go back to what the state is exactly. Okay, the state is the entity that has the monopoly on the initiation of force. This at the end of the day, the state is basically just the gang that won, and we have our state government, or which is a gang that controls this particular state. Then we have the federal government, which, well, they're interconnected, is in some ways sometimes they are at odds. So the way I'm looking at this is just basically two rival gangs duking it out. Like the federal government has its own agenda, and in this case, they are on the side of delaying, at the very least, these anti-fossil fuel mandates. The state government, on the other hand, wants us to transition away from fossil fuels sooner. So currently they're at odds. So I'm just kind of viewing this as two gangs fighting.
Right,
okay,
but
one of them is slightly better to have to live under at the moment.
That's the question, right? Is at some point, because again, none of us here are going to be able to fix this. To be
right. So which one is better to live under?
Which one is better to for the individuals of the state is the question.
Right.
And
right. A constitutionalist would look at it much differently. They'd be concerned with, okay, does the federal government really have the power to usurp state law? Personally, as an anarchist, I am just looking at it as, okay,
right.
This is just two gangs fighting. So I'm just going to go with which one preserves my individual rights slightly better.
Hold on, guys. There's something here, though, that we didn't quite put enough of a fine point on when we were discussing New York's egregious policies, which is, what is the libertarian solution? Because the ideal is that we wouldn't have to rely on the federal government to step in. We wouldn't need a rival gang to beat up the gang that's holding us hostage, right? That we would be ungovernable enough so that the state could pass whatever stupid mandates it wants and we could all laugh at them, which actually, if you think about it, is how the whole COVID thing ended. right?
Well,
So
that's
how
but
does that
given enough
translate to
time.
energy?
See, the problem is it's given enough time and given enough pushback from the citizens, because and how many people get hurt in the meantime. Okay, because
Well,
that's the thing.
nobody wants to be the first man to charge the enemy trench. Yeah, I get that.
Well, this is the problem, and this is exactly what happened with COVID. Remember, 2 weeks, 2 weeks to slow the spread. 2 weeks, right? Okay, fine. And most people were like, all right, you got a point. Nobody wants
They
to see
wanted their
nobody wants to see
staycation,
grandma
so-
croak. You know what I mean? Like, okay, yes, we get that. But then they used that to morph it into more and more and more. And this is the same thing, is once they start this and demand that, all cars become, first of all, the things that they say are completely impossible. I will say that point blank. You want to put me on a panel in front of the state people, I will argue that to my last breath, because what they want has no basis in reality. It cannot be done.
I don't think they care.
No, they don't. And that's the problem. Is so you're dealing with people who only want control. Control is the major aspect of this. It has nothing to do with actually saving the environment, reducing pollution, increasing our energy independence, or anything like that. What the idea is to make sure that the state has birth to death 24/7 control over you. And
How do we
that's what they
stop
want.
them without a bigger state to
Well,
come in
this
and beat up
this
the
is
medium
problem,
state?
isn't it? It can be done, but the problem is that the pressure needs to become high enough. Like, it takes enough pain for people to finally stand. This is what happened during 2021, 22.
Do you
Is
think
that
we've got enough
Mass
pain on the
non-compliance.
climate
Enough
front?
not yet.
people
Not
realized
yet.
it was
No.
crap, and they just stopped complying with the regulations. Eventually, the state realizes, okay, like enough people not complying, and they eventually kind of give up, or at the very least, like for example, with the COVID passports, like there was enough immediate backlash against those that the state kind of took a step back and was like, okay, I think we overstepped a little bit. We just need to boil this frog a little bit more
Well, because they
slowly.
that's exactly what it is. That didn't work, so we'll back off a little.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's
I
a
mean,
ratchet effect.
But they
Yeah.
did set the precedent, though, that they can do lockdowns, and there was already talk about climate lockdowns at one point. Like,
Yeah,
But
this is
but
not
here's the thing.
implausible.
I want to push back against both of you a little bit here, because I think one of the reasons, maybe I'm being optimistic here, but one of the reasons Trump won is that I think a whole swath of America
Mhm.
is just tired of this agenda. They do see through, the
Yeah, because
left
time's gone
wing
by.
agenda. And I think that they're putting their faith in the electoral process maybe one final time before shit gets more serious. So in that case,
See.
shouldn't we be rooting for Trump?
Well,
Maybe we don't need to build parallel ecosystems and live in a bunker. Maybe we can just trust Trump to fix everything.
It's a rival gang, though, situation. Like,
Well, yeah, but the
okay,
problem is the what was the old Arabic saying? The enemy of my enemy is my friend. So at least
Not
at least
always,
in a
though.
short-term basis, again, because at least like you said, from a constitutional point of view, okay, there is an argument. We as libertarians hate the Interstate Commerce Act. However, in this particular case, it actually kind of applies, because you have a case where New York State is going to dictate to the energy producers, to the car manufacturers, all of whom are nationwide, and say, well, you're going to do it this way or else. And the federal government can at least make the argument in court saying, well, no, because that doesn't affect just you. It affects everyone. And you may have your argument, but if the federal government can, basically is the protector of all, then they should have the authority to decide whether this stuff happens or not.
Are the checks and balances inherent in the judicial system and the other two branches of government, are they enough?
This is the question. And I'm not saying this is
It
not the
occasionally
libertarian point
works.
of view. This is just from a
occasionally
constitutional
works.
perspective. Okay.
Like we have the system that currently exists, okay, it was designed to have checks and balances. This has been undermined on so many levels. Occasionally you see it work, like you'll see a particularly bad law overturned by a higher court, or eventually ruled unconstitutional by the Supreme Court. These things do occasionally happen, but
Well, this is
not often
why
enough.
the parties try and pack the court with their own people. This is what's going on, and we're seeing it right now with.
Or they create. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, with the president. The president will sign an executive order, and they'll instantly file a lawsuit, and they'll get a friendly judge to issue an injunction, and it really right now it's just like complete chaos is what it is.
Right. Or like they create some three-letter agency that's full of unelected bureaucrats who don't really have to abide by the checks and balances that exist, that they can kind of make decisions on their own. And that
all of this got far worse once that happened, but wasn't that undone by the Supreme Court about a year ago? Maybe it was less than a year ago. I know it takes a lot of time for changes to flow and trickle down through the system. But there was the ability of Congress prior to this court ruling. I can look it up in a minute, but the court ruled that Congress has to actually write the regulation and pass it. They can't just have like an intention and then hand it over to the three-letter regulators, to write the rules however they want. Because actually most of this crap, like the California style stuff, gets written by unelected bureaucratic regulators who are part of the deep state. They stay the same from one administration to another. And before people go, oh, conspiracy theory, the original meaning of deep state was just the bureaucrats that stay in power and do their job regardless of who's elected.
Well,
which is most of the three-letter agencies, along with basic government employees who keep the system running but are not elected and not accountable to the voters.
But does this not then speak to Trump's desire when they created Doge to let's start gutting some of these agencies? Because again, are they actually acting in the interests of Americans, or are they acting for political or just self interests?
Well, Bob, let's set aside whether this is a con or a show, and let's say that a libertarian got elected. You, me, Rose, one of us got elected.
Millet.
Wouldn't we be doing some version? Well, I don't know about Millet either. He's propped up by some powerful interests. But hey, I'm rooting for a lot of the things he's doing. And again, to my point, no matter who gets elected, wouldn't we be doing many, if not all, of the things that Trump at least plays that he's doing, or that Millet has been credited with doing?
That's the thing. We talk about wanting to take over the world and leave people alone, but what if? Okay, so we get elected president. Okay, what about these states that are passing laws that blatantly violate people's rights? Yeah, should we be able to say no? You're not allowed to do that. Is it acceptable to exercise power in order to take power away from people who are violating regular people's rights?
But what happens when the same tools are used against us later when the next administration
But that's
comes
the
back?
thing. This is where people don't think ahead. They support something when someone who's in office, when someone is in office who they personally like, and then they don't think about what's going to happen when someone they don't want in office gets a hold of the same powers.
But I'll tell you what, let me quote from the preamble to our own platform. Okay? A just and prosperous society is rooted in the recognition of the inherent, unalienable rights of individuals to life, liberty, property, and the pursuit of happiness. Governments are instituted to safeguard these rights, deriving their legitimacy solely from the explicit consent of the governed. Okay, now there's more, but those are the important statements, is that the whole point of government is supposed to be to protect individual rights.
With the explicit consent. Rose said we didn't sign anything.
Well, the problem you have as a country is There's 300 million people, and getting them all to sign anything is very problematic from a physical perspective, let alone a philosophical one.
Right.
Well,
The
that's why I'm
social
an anarchist.
contract is not a real contract. Like you did not agree to something. Simply having been born in a particular location is not consenting to being ruled by whoever happens
Understood,
to
but you're
hold the
ruled. You're
monopoly on
ruled whether you
force.
like it or not. You know what I
Well,
mean? That's
in a perfect world, there would be governance without government in the way we're used to it. There wouldn't be a monopoly on violence. You would have government service providers. And before we go off into Rothbardian territory, I'm just saying, like, within the existing system, what is the alternative to relying on the feds, right? We've got jury nullification, we've got lawfare, raising funds and taking the state to court. We've got parallel systems so that we can, basically drill our own gas, I guess, and run our own heating systems and whatever the state says. And then I guess general community resistance, just like living with people who have the same values.
Right.
Is that
Yeah.
it?
I guess having a black market in gas stoves and living with people
that's
who are like-minded. I mean,
Well,
the Soviet
we've
Union was
seen.
undermined by their thriving black market.
You're
So
right.
it does work, but
But we've seen what happens when the government decides that it really wants to go after people who aren't complying.
they'll make it. That's the problem, though. They'll choose people and they'll make an example. I mean, we saw this
right.
with
But it
Waco, with
doesn't.
Ruby Ridge, with
Ironically, though, it doesn't stop it. Okay, it never can stop it because, again, if there is enough of an incentive, people will do it. Okay, it's the same thing. Like they could ban every gas stove in the state. Okay, but if they can't get it done nationally, what's going to happen is people are just going to go out of state and buy
Mhm.
one and sneak them into the state. And yes, some
These
will get
people
caught
don't care
and they'll
about
get
that,
thrown.
though. They care about having the power, and they
Yeah.
can use that power because something is illegal to selectively enforce it when they want to, because it props up their power. Not only that, but it's a ratchet, like you said, and they're very patient. So those
Yeah,
in
but
power who are ideological are willing to wait a generation until gas stoves are so, like only old people like gas stoves.
yeah, but what happens? Let's put it this way: is New York State gaining or losing population?
Well, it depends on how you count and how many immigrants and migrants aren't
Well,
being
well,
counted.
people are moving
no,
out
real
because of
life.
the
Like
cost of living
people,
here.
U.S. citizens who are naturalized citizens who currently reside in the state, are there more or less every day? Because what
I
happens
want to
is,
say less. I really
yeah,
want to believe that
well, that
because
is
I'd
true.
like New York to be losing the popularity game.
Well, this is the thing because people vote with their feet.
But
That's what
then why do we
happens.
still live here? Here
Well,
we are
that's now
complaining
that
about New
that makes you
York.
wonder about
If
our,
you're lucky enough to be able to just up and move, like that's
well,
not
that's
something that
it's not
okay,
a
the privileged types are able to pack up and leave, but not everyone is in a position to be able to do that. Like,
or the pain becomes high enough. Perfect example. Remington
right,
Arms.
it
Remington
becomes
Arms.
high enough that you eventually just
Yeah.
cut your losses and leave, but that's going to take a lot. Like,
Well,
it would take a
but it's
lot for like a
happening.
week.
Remington Arms, the oldest firearms manufacturer, one of the oldest firearms manufacturers in the world, gave up on New York. Said, we're done.
Hmm.
We're out of here. See ya. Now New York's lost that revenue. They lost their tax income. See, again, one of the great things that did happen with this administration, hopefully, is that New York doesn't keep getting the free ride that it was getting from the federal government. The
They
problem
are
is
feeling
that,
the pain.
right,
Hmm.
the federal government was funding New York to the tune of billions of dollars so that they could just spend it on their agenda. Okay. And okay, if you like that agenda, that's great. But is that a really good idea in the long run? Is that because, again,
They don't care.
they talk about sustainability all the time. Okay, how about sustainability in your finances? What happens when somebody like the Orange Man come along and go, you know what? We're going to stop paying you all of this money that you're basically using to exercise tyranny on your own citizens. And then what happens? Go into Manhattan and look at the property values, look at what's going on. Okay. And now you've got a case of the two of them duking it out. So who's going to win? Is New York State going to win? Or is the current administration going to be able to use those executive orders to basically halt this? And the question is, what will a court say? Who the heck knows? You know what I mean? And this fight is going to go on for years. The I don't know. I honestly don't know, because again, if it doesn't, basically, if they can't restrain states like New York, then people are just going to leave. That's the bottom line. You know, you can go other states, pay 1/3 the price for a house, not have the restrictions. You want gas, get gas. You want, whatever. You want all these other things. You want to get a big truck, go buy a big truck. Okay. At some point, people are just going to be like, I'm done. I don't want to do it. This goes back to, like I said, again, the congestion pricing thing. Because again, why would you want to go into Manhattan at this point? Like, what is the benefit?
Bob, if you're right, then all we have to do is sit back and let enough people feel enough pain and
I
impose
want to
enough
accelerate the
pain.
process. I want it faster, because this is, again, if people like us are out there explaining the reality to people, explaining that this is fantasy by the state, what they're talking about is, because again, people can't unhear the things you say. They can reject them, but they can't not hear them. And this is where,
Unless they're scared.
well, yeah, but this is where we need to be out there saying this. And this was a Ron Paul thing, is like he said, you people cannot unhear what we tell them. And yes, it takes time. It's patience, okay? It's, what was it described? Patience is described as a mill that will grind out results if you give it long enough. And that's what it is. If we have people out there telling the truth, not shading it behind this political nonsense, eventually people begin to go, you're right. I'm tired of this. I don't want to deal with this anymore. And either they will leave, or they will basically change the way they do things and fight back or vote or whatever, So I'm a firm believer in that, because again, yes, you're not going to win every battle. Okay. But look at the big thing that happened in 2020. Okay. Everybody went down that road. All these horrible things happened, and eventually people are like, this is crazy. Why are we doing this? Which is why I find it completely amusing, by the way, just a complete side note, is that, Andrew Cuomo's running for mayor of New York City.
Mayor. Yeah.
Okay. So explain to me, is he going to ban the 32-ounce big gulp again, like Bloomberg did? Wait, and if he does, well, what about the people on EBT? Is he going to ban it for them too?
Govern me harder, Daddy. I think that's his supporters right there.
Well, this is, but
people forget. Okay, the whole. He stepped down just as the nursing home scandal, which we all knew about. Those of us who were paying attention knew about from the beginning. Like, he stepped down just as that was coming to light over allegations that he sexually harassed people, which every politician has done. Let's be real here. Yeah, I guess he is hoping that enough years have gone by that people have just forgotten.
Well, or that keep in mind that the city is always where his power center lay.
Right.
Okay, because upstate, again, upstate will not be involved in this election. This will be purely the 5 boroughs.
Yeah, New York City decides every election. So,
well,
yeah.
but again, so you have Staten Island, who will probably vote heavily red. Okay, because they are basically the independent, the old Italian communities, like all of that. You have the Bronx, which used to be, but now they're much more immigrant, Hispanic immigrant. So I'm thinking he figures that he could just pull the vote off, because the city
It'll
is
be
mostly
interesting
blue.
to see. And honestly, I think that the more urban areas, the more urban an area becomes, the more likely it is to be blue, and the more people want to be governed because they
Because they can
they
promise
live
them
cheek
stuff.
by jowl.
Well, but they can promise them stuff. The politician can stand in front of those, you know, double or triple the number of people, and I can promise you this, and I can promise you that. And when it's a
And
rural
people are
area,
not self-sufficient in the urban
exactly,
areas.
that's exactly what it is. And they're much more likely to buy into that rather than somebody who is already independent, somebody who has their own
Right.
farm, doesn't need the
But
government.
but here's my point. How long can people like us, hold out before the pain gets to be too much, and then we move somewhere,
It's,
where people are more independent, they have the resiliency, they have their own food and communities
right.
and the values that go with that.
I don't know. Ask Detroit.
Like,
They found out.
well, again, that's an urban area though, and
Yeah,
upstate New York
that's
used to be a big manufacturing place. Everywhere I drive living up here, I'm
yep.
reminded of the legacy of what we lost. But my point is, how far can we keep retreating? Are we going to end up like, Aboriginal tribes
Well, the
that
problem is you have
hide
to
in mountain
live.
valleys
You
while
have
the
to live
cities
to starve.
expand?
So what do you do? I mean, it's again, this is where real life reality comes in, and everybody has to earn a living. Everybody has to feed their family. They have to do the things that people do. Okay, so you know, a lot of people don't want to hear it. They don't want to hear it because the things that they're doing in their daily lives are enough, and that is they're at their capacity. They don't want to deal with other stuff. Now, us, the loonies, we realize that this isn't a good idea long term, and it's not going to help. You know, we think past the short term and say, look, if we don't convince people that this is a bad idea, it's going to be bad not just for us, but for everyone. And unfortunately,
Mhm.
we aren't the ones that want to impose it by force. See, if we were the other parties, we'd be like, do this or else. But we don't
Mhm.
work that way. We try and convince people by rational discussion, by logic, you know. So
Well, what's beautiful to me, though, is that individual people with our beliefs can invent technologies
mhm.
and techniques, and then we can disseminate that to people who have needs. Whether they share the ideology or not
Yep.
fully, they will adopt things that make their lives better. So if you look at, solar panels on the roof or,
Yeah.
things like that, there are many technologies out there that people may be able to use to circumvent government control. But I think we'll have to save a deeper dive, in some direct action policies into maybe another episode.
Well, so
I
here's the
think we'll
question,
wrap
though.
it.
Okay, so let's answer the question. Which one, in everybody's opinion, should be either legally or libertarian wise or constitutionally, which one should win this argument that we've been discussing?
Well, I'll
The
give you my
state or
thoughts
the
on
federal
that
government?
because I see both sides of it. So, let's walk through it, right? I mean, we opened the episode by giving the state its most charitable shot, and then held that vision up against the values we believe in. Sure enough, New York's climate law doesn't pass the liberty test. It fails on consent, it fails on autonomy, it fails on property rights. But where things got more complicated and I think more real is when we asked how we respond. What do we do when the state violates our rights? Can we ever cheer for federal action to restrain state power, even if it's just another arm of the same machine or just a rival gang? And I'll be honest, I feel the pull in both directions. On the one hand, I feel we made a powerful case for sticking to principle, resisting all coercion, rejecting the temptation to use one tyrant to check another. And I respect that deeply. That is the libertarian ideal. But here's the other side of it. We've been standing on principle for decades, relying on constitutional protections and rule of law, and we are losing. Liberty isn't just eroding, it's being strip mined by the environmentalists, but also by the others. And every time we take the high road, the other side, the statists, they build another agency, They impose another mandate, another restriction that's almost impossible to undo, Doge notwithstanding, and we'll see how much of that sticks. So maybe we don't need to abandon principle, but we do need to upgrade what we do with it. And that means building parallel systems, civil disobedience, legal resistance, community level resilience. And yes, sometimes it may mean using what's left of the system to slow the machine down, not because it's the solution, but because we need time to build something better. And hoping that politicians at any level will protect freedom for us is a fool's bet, unless we find a way to hold them accountable. And that doesn't just mean at the ballot box. It means creating a certain reality, a ground truth, that there are lines government simply can't cross, not just because we'll vote against them, but because we'll make it so their rules and regulations are unenforceable. This is how we defend freedom, by using it.
Like a perfect
Right. Like I would
here.
like to see mass non-compliance. However, like until we get enough people on board with us, like, okay,
But you are.
I'm not going to condemn the federal government. I'm not going to actively fight against them. But at the same time, I understand this is a very dangerous game to play because, like, I'm not going to actively support them because their power could just as easily be used against us, even though currently it is sort of benefiting us by slowing down the rate at which the state government has been encroaching on our rights. In the meantime, though, we should take this opportunity to help build up these parallel systems so that we make it difficult for the state government to even enforce these laws that they're trying to pass.
Well, this is where, again, we're already doing that. We're on alternative media. Okay, we don't go along with the propaganda legacy media that basically parrots what the people in power want us to think. We're out here on an independent platform, putting out our own views so that other people can see them. We hope they'll agree, okay? But at least they're getting out there. And this is where the whole censorship thing is so important, is to stop the government, whichever one, whether it's the state government, the federal government, even your local government, from censoring and getting out the ideas. Because again, when the ideas are out there, it's amazing how eventually, it doesn't happen like instant, you don't snap your fingers, but slowly it gets pushed and there's pushback on what the state does. And hopefully, if enough people will do what we're doing, which is get out there, talk about these things, argue them out, then we can come to a position where the state has no choice but to acquiesce and to back off, and give us back some of our liberties at least.
All right. Well, that's where we'll wrap it tonight. Thanks again to Robert and Rose for a sharp, thoughtful conversation, one that got right to the heart of the strategic dilemmas we face. And thank you to our listeners. Until next time, question everything, build something better, and as always, keep testing.
Where will you be when the order is given to censor your mind, as free speech is forbidden, as martyrs for peace from the world will be driven away by the sound of a bellowing thunder and choke on the blood of a dream going under? As arrogant men tear up our Constitution, and from every direction we cry revolution, standing together and without permission, soldiers for truth in the war of attrition, the love of our country as our ammunition. I'm a long, long way from my home, and I'm going to change all the things I find strange, for I am not one man alone. Yes, I